Hello, I'm Vinny Catalano, and welcome back. Today I'm speaking with Don Rissmiller, Chief Economist with Strategas Research Partners. We're going to be exploring issues related to the economics profession and the global economy in general. Don, welcome.
Thank you, Vinny.
Don, take a moment, if you would, for all of our viewers to get a sense of you, what you do, and what Strategas Research Partners is all about.
Sure. So we're an institutional brokerage firm located here in New York, and we focus on macro research. So that would be monitoring the economic data, also doing investment strategy on the equity or fixed income side, as well as technical analysis, some survey work, and generally helping our clients with their requests.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I've had the privilege of doing is getting together with you from time to time. We get a cup of coffee down by Grand Central Terminal over here, and we talk about things, and frankly, you function as my mentor. Tremendously helpful to me in understanding some of the issues, and I'd like this conversation to be a lot like when we get together, a flow about some of the things that I think are out there that do not get a whole lot of time and effort focused in on them. One of the first questions that I have for you is, can the economics profession deal with these hard to quantify elements that pop up? And let's take one as an example of a fat tail Black Swan type of an event. Is the economics profession built to identify those kind of things, or is it like the criticism from Queen Elizabeth a number of years ago? How come none of you guys, saw this, great catastrophe happening in the Great Recession?
Sure. So it's an interesting question, and certainly something that's on a lot of folks' minds. Finding step functions, nonlinear events, is always difficult but interesting.
Okay.
So part of the issue is you can identify a theme, but not necessarily the timing with which that theme or that analysis plays out. And that's been consistent over time,
right,
as you mentioned. Part of it is that some of the models don't have a good handle on the financial sector. Part of it is that some of the models don't have a good handle on the behavioral side of
or
the equation.
Perhaps a geopolitical elements that are there.
Yeah, right. Geopolitical events are something that are tough to quantify, but almost always there.
Sure.
Events happening today in the Ukraine that people are watching, they make news, they influence markets, but it's hard to know whether today is the day or tomorrow is the day.
And let me just add one other one, which is the change structure of the market itself. The financial industry is so dramatically different now than it was decades ago. So how do guys like you try to figure out, hey, how do I bring that into the, into the mix?
Yeah, and it's difficult because I think approaching it from an analytical point of view, you're always trying to determine whether something is signal or noise. And so when you see something like the flash crash, I would say a knee-jerk reaction would be that looks like something that's not signal. That looks like something that's noise. It'll reverse. It reverses quickly. But what we're seeing is some of those type of events are having lasting impacts.
Is that right? Wow. Okay.
Folks are saying, well, maybe I have to be careful when I think about the market,
right, because
maybe it's run by a different set of rules or a different set of trading principles than when folks
But
learn.
within your profession, how do you and how do your peers deal with those kind of things? How do you bring them into a model? I mean, it's it's sort of like sits out there, and it's we know it's there, and we want to be aware of it, but I can't really factor it in, And it isn't just the economics profession; it's the evaluation models, financial models, traditional equity analysis, those kind of. How do you deal with that?
So there are a couple of approaches.
Okay.
And none of them are perfect.
Right.
There's still some developments happening. There's
No,
developments
I was looking
behavioral,
for perfection,
economics, and there's a lot going on at the academic community level that can help inform how this should proceed. One distinction we've tried to draw is between forecasting and research. In other words, I think it's easier to do research on a topic and to understand a topic and to try and understand which of the data points that are out there are the most relevant.
Right.
And so part of the problem historically was data was so valuable that we spent a lot of statistical techniques in developing these methods to get as much information as possible out of a small number of data points.
Right, okay.
Now there's so much data You're developing new techniques, you're using these big data
Overwhelming?
concepts, perhaps an overwhelming amount of data.
Right, okay.
And that's a change.
And it's hard to identify between the noise and what matters.
And a lot of effort, I'd say, gets put into that. And I would say that's the difference between research and forecasting.
Okay.
So forecasting, you can find relationships, and sometimes they break down. And then identifying why they break down becomes part of the question. The research process, I'd say, is trying to understand the landscape, and it differs depending on the person doing it, the approach, their training.
Right, true. And which in the economics profession, there were many different types of economists. You know, sometimes I think many think, you know, paint the economists with a broad, brush.
Yeah.
You know, they're all different level and areas.
And you might say a PhD economist at an academic institution is trying to get 95% of the answer no matter how long it takes. It could take years, whereas
Right, okay.
someone who works in the financial industry may be trying to get most of the answer right now, as much as you can get with the information that's
So
available.
what I
That's the
can
difference.
do, if I'm a client of Strategas and I have a dialogue with you, that I can gain value from the analytical aspect of it, the research aspect of it, the forecasting element of it, that's a hard one.
Well, and there are better ways to do forecasts. There are different ways to do forecasts. I think we have to be careful not to have a level of overconfidence that comes from having a numerical
Right.
target. That's
Sure.
the lesson from the
Right.
past 6 years.
Sure.
But that's been learned over and over again.
Okay.
And it's not to say that you can excuse all models.
Right.
There are sets of work being done. They're trying to improve models, incorporating the financial sector, incorporating some of
Okay.
these behavioral items. That's certainly worthwhile, and that's something that's...
And just stay with the behavioral element of it. I mean, we know that economics is a social science, okay, just like investing is a social science. And when do you think there might be some aspects of a quantifiable dynamic to the behavioral function? Or is that something that is like, you know, the Holy Grail?
Well,
We'll find it.
I think you can make strides in that direction. Here's the best way I've heard it put is that sometimes we spend too much time answering the questions that we know have answers. In other words, regardless of how interesting they are, if it has an answer, that gets an awful lot of resources because somebody can find that and publish a paper on it and do these type of things. Sometimes the interesting questions don't have a definitive answer, and therefore they get deprived of resources that might otherwise have been dedicated to that. And so that's where I think some of the behavioral items, because they're fuzzier,
Sure.
are still out there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, to be continued, the more coffee meetings at Grand Central and perhaps more discussions with you on this where we can explore it further. It's just, my sense is that this is an underappreciated aspect, an area that, you know, traditional analysis really doesn't kind of get you all the way there, and yet we know it's there. We can. It's a lot like dark energy and dark matter. We know it's there. We know it's in the universe, and we know it's a powerful force. We just can't identify it or, you know, or quantify it and process it in that regard.
Stay tuned.
Well, right. Stay tuned. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Don, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Dan.